Sāksim. Laidīsim vaļā. Labvakar. Cienījamie klātesošie. Man ir liels prieks sveikt visus šeit Rīgas Tehniskajā universitātē, lai runātu par aktuālu tēmu zaļajām enerģijām un tiem risinājumiem, kas ar to ir saistīts. Un īpaši paldies mūsu sadarbības partneriem šajā sarīkojumā Latvijas Vācijas augstskolu birojam un Ievai Prankai, kas šeit arī ir klāt. Tā kā varbūt īsā ievadā es tūlīt došu vārdu viņai. Bet man ir īpaši prieks, ka šī vakar, kā to sauc, zinātnes sarunās, mums ir 3 lieliski viesi, un mums būs iespēja noklausīties 2 lieliskas prezentācijas par šodienas aktuālajām tēmām. Vārds Ieva jums.
Jā, labvakar. Paldies. Good afternoon. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I will continue then in English. And on behalf of the Baltic-German University Liaison office, I would like to thank you, Professor Bratuškins, for a nice introduction. And welcome all you to our scientific evening, Sustainable Energy, Challenges and Opportunities. And first of all, I would like to introduce you very briefly our institution, Baltic-German University Liaison office. And its aim is to act as a scientific bridge between the Baltic states and Germany, to be a platform for scientists and society to discuss current topics by supporting scientific projects and organizing scientific events like this event tonight, which is dedicated to a very topical subject, sustainable energy. And as we stand on the cusp of rapidly changing climate and increasing energy demand, sustainable energy sources present both challenges and also opportunities that we must address. And the challenge is clear. Fossil fuels, our primary source of energy for decades, are causing irreparable harm to our planet. We are depleting these finite resources at an alarming rate, and the environmental consequences are profound. However, the challenges we face also present incredible opportunities, and the shift towards sustainable energy sources offers a way to mitigate the damage and create a more resilient and vibrant future. And in order to discuss this very hot topic, we have organized this scientific evening, and I would like to thank our cooperation partners for all the support, the Rotary Club Bochum, Rechen, and Rīga Technical University, and especially Professor Judith Bratuškins. And today's scientific event will start with the guest lecture after the Zeitenwende, secure, clean, and affordable energy supply for climate neutrality, by Professor Andreas Löschel. And before we begin, I would like to meet you, our first speaker. Professor Andreas Löschel holds the chair of Environmental Resource Economics and Sustainability at the Ruhr University Bochum. He is lead author of the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change for the 5th and 6th assessment report, and since 2011, the chairman of the expert commission of the German government to monitor the energy transformation. Professor Löschel is also a member of the German National Academy of Science and Engineering and received the German Economic Prize of the Joachim Herz Foundation 2022 for outstanding research in economics. In the economist ranking of the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, he was several times among the 50 most influential economists in Germany. So we are very glad and now looking forward for your guest lecture. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, so Thanks a lot for the invitation. It's a pleasure and honor to be here, and I'm really happy that there is something like the Baltic-German Hochschulkontor, and we talked about all the activities that are ongoing, and I think especially if we think about energy, I think this is really indispensable. No? Lapvaka here, and I today would like to talk about the Zeitenwende. That's a German word, and actually it dates back to a speech of the German Chancellor that was given February 24th, just after the Russian invasion into Ukraine, where he actually addressed the Bundestag, and he said this is a Zeitenwende, and he actually announced a series of measures that he wants to take as a response to this severe situation, sometimes called a revolution. And of course this stretches from, let's say, the increase in defense spending towards the deployment of military and support also to the Baltic states, to the eastern front of the NATO, but also to the energy sector, where he promised to diversify more the German energy supply, the German energy suppliers, but also to invest more in renewables, more in energy efficiency, and also to build new infrastructure, LNG terminals, which will make us less dependent on Russian gas. So therefore, I labeled this talk the, let's see where I'm coming. Okay. So this is the Zeitenwende, and I called this after the Zeitenwende, because now this was more than 1.5 years ago, and the interesting thing is, of course, what really happened and how do we actually move towards energy supply that is secure, clean, and affordable, and achieving climate neutrality in the long run. Well, the first question is, how could it happen? That we were taken by surprise, and how could it happen that we were affected so badly by these energy crises of 2021 and 22? Okay, well, the German energy system is in principle a fossil-based system. Okay, here I show you primary energy demand in Germany and the developments between 1990 and 2022. So what you can see in 30 years is that, well, in principle, yes, we've increased the share of renewables, okay? But, well, still more than 80% of our primary energy demand is fossil-based. And what we have done is we've basically substituted the coal, hard coal, lignite, with natural gas. Okay, so that means coal was going down, natural gas was going up. Okay, the system still is fossil-based. Let's say the hardest changes happened in electricity generation. There, around half of the electricity now is coming from renewables. Okay, but still fossil-based system. Why is that the case? Well, the reason is we are facing two dilemmas. The first dilemma is the climate dilemma. So climate protection is a public good. Okay, so whatever you are doing, it is very likely not going to change the climate. Even as a country, the costs and benefits are very poorly aligned. The benefits are more or less spread over the world, mainly to the southern part of the world and to future generations, but the costs have to be borne or have to be taken by current generations, mainly in the north. Okay, so costs and benefits are not well aligned. Okay, in these systems, which means that in a global public good, where you have very little rewards for your doing, there's a strong tendency to act as a free rider. Don't do too much, let the others do it. Okay, which means there is a situation where rational, self-interested individuals act not in achieving the common group or group interest. Okay, so individual interest and group interest, global interest, deviate. Okay, and that's a problem, and some people call it the biggest market failure of the world, which means market as such do not provide for this global perspective. Everybody's individually looking at the situation or nationally looking at the situation, okay, but not really taking into account the aspects, the negative impacts of individual behavior on others. Okay, so climate change has costs on the global south and the future generations that are not reflected in our activities, in market prices. It's a market failure. Okay, but this social dilemma is not only visible in climate protection. Social dilemma is also visible in energy security issues. Okay, there the same situation arises. So individual, rationally individual actors don't have the public good in the back of their mind. No, the national interests. No, they are looking for cheap energy. Okay, which means they were looking where to get cheap energy from, like gas pipelines from Russia. In the end, the German energy supply was relying heavily on gas. 55% of our energy was coming from Russian gas. Okay, so from the 55% of our gas supply was coming from Russia. Okay, so that means also individual actors don't have basic notions of national energy security in the back of their mind. That's not their duty. No, they look at individually rational things. No? So that means what we have to do is we have to find a proper framework in which individuals, companies can act without forgetting about what economists call externalities, which are not reflected in market behavior. Okay? Now, how can you do that? Well, there are two possibilities. For the climate resilience, then there you would look for climate policies on a global scale, at best, but on a European or German scale, if you cannot reach these global agreements. For the energy security issue, you also have to think about how you cope with this in a proper way. But let's start with the climate resilience. So Germany has implemented very strict climate protection targets. In the Zeitenwende speech, this was linked to a new claim of becoming climate neutral in 2045. Before, Germany was actually very vague about this. They said we are going to reduce emissions by 80 to 95% in 2050, and then everybody said, well, I'm the missing 5 or 20%, so in principle I do not have to do a lot, because there will be simply some emissions that are still feasible also in the long run. Well, now this has changed. Now it's climate neutrality by 2045. Of course, you will probably have as well some negative emissions later on. So we are going to take out some emissions from the atmosphere later on with natural or technical solutions, which might also open up a very small space for emission activities, but this will be very, very small. Okay, so very drastic targets to reduce emissions of CO2 and greenhouse gases. And you can see that already in 2022, so last year, we've reduced by about 41%. But you can see that this will be really very challenging. So we have now to achieve 65% reductions in only 8 years. So dramatic reductions, mainly coming actually from the electricity sector, because that's what I showed you. So electricity and electrification is relatively going well in Germany. It's relatively easy compared to other sectors. I mean, here we are in architectural faculty, so here you are probably most interested in buildings. Of course, we have done quite a lot in buildings. We actually have large target in buildings, but we are just coming out of a longer process with a building law that was trying to mandate more or less heat pumps in Germany as the primary energy heating source or heating technology, which basically failed. So we were not able to move very far ahead, which means that in all these other sectors it's much more difficult to electrify. That's true for building and for transport, but it's even more the case, for example, for industry. So therefore you can see that industry will be the #1 polluter in 2030, because many of the processes in industry are difficult to electrify. If you think about high temperature heat applications, for example, very difficult to electrify. So therefore emissions will still stand in these sectors. Okay, so what's the other thing you have to keep in mind? That is geopolitical resilience. That is the second part of the story. Now, I told you that, I mean, we had these huge imports of gas from Russia. And last year, then we were dealing with the question, what can we do if we want to move away from Russian gas supply? And about 1 week after the invasion, I wrote together with some colleagues a paper that was relatively influential, that was called What If? The economic effects for Germany of a stop of energy imports from Russia. Actually, we did not advocate to stop energy consumption from Russia, but what came out is that this is in fact feasible. You could stop it, and we were actually attacked a lot, because people did not believe this message. But in the end, I think we were relatively doing okay with our modeling. So this is a macroeconomic model where we thought, how can we get rid of this high share of gas from Russia? And in principle, you can think of 4 drivers. Okay, the first is, I mean, you can think about pipeline gas. Germany is getting pipeline gas from North Africa and from Norway. So are there more possibilities to stock gas from pipelines? Okay. Second opportunity or possibility is LNG gas. Can you use LNG terminals in other regions of the world? You have to keep in mind Germany has no LNG ports until last year because it was seen as too expensive. Okay, that's exactly what I just said. You don't factor in this aspect of energy security, okay, which means then, of course, LNG gas is more expensive than pipeline gas. If you don't understand this, you only go for pipeline gas. You don't never build an LNG terminal. Others have done this differently. Germans have not done it. So, okay, you can get more LNG from other European ports, especially in the Netherlands and Belgium, in German case, no? But you can as well build that up, of course. And get more LNG from German LNG terminals. You could as well use your storage. The problem is Russia was actually reducing gas imports or exports to Germany already in the winter before the invasion, which means that our storage sites were relatively at a low level already when we entered into this situation. So no possibility here. And the fourth thing that you can do is reduce supply. Reduce demand. So you have a supply shock that's left over, let's say left over, and that means you have to cope with less gas. Okay, so you have a supply shock, reduce demand, and we estimated here in this paper that we might have to cope with 30% less gas in total. Okay, and the question is, can we do that? And in principle, we have seen that yes, we can do that. Why? Because the response of households and industry to high gas prices was very large. Many people did not expect that this is even possible. Okay, when we had this type of discussion about our paper, they say, well, you cannot do more than 9% gas savings in industry. That's technically, that's not feasible to do more. Okay? Now, what we've seen is that, we have massive price hikes on the gas market. Okay, these massive price hikes, they actually led to massive reductions in demand, first by industry, but as well by households. In German industry reduced in the maximum 28% gas. Households reduced also more than 20% of gas demand during last year. And this is really amazing. The price elasticities are not zero. Okay, so people respond to prices. And this was one of the reasons why we managed to come through the last winter. It actually turns out that this might also be the story for this winter, because at the moment we have full storage sites, gas storage sites, lower gas prices, but demand is still lower than before. It's basically on last year's level, more or less. So some of these things they have implemented seem also to stick with lower gas prices that we are facing today. Okay, and that's important because if you look at transformation pathways, so net zero pathways, there are two aspects of these net zero pathways. The first one is how to get the final energy climate neutral. And how to do that means you have to cut, so that's final energy demand. What you have to do is you have to cut final energy demand by energy efficiency massively. Okay, and then most of the leftover energy necessary is actually electrified. Electrified uses, energy applications that I have described already. Not everything, and then you can argue whether 10% or 20% of final energy demand will be based on other energy carriers, mainly hydrogen or synthetic fuels. But there will be a smaller part that has to be not based on electricity, but on hydrogen and synthetic fuels, so like green ammonia, green methanol, and so forth. But there's a second part which is on gas. And if you look at energy sovereignty on gas, it means whatever you do, you have to cut down energy demand. So in all these scenarios, it's not only about zero carbon, but it's also now about reducing gas demand by around 30%, and then the residual being actually delivered from LNG terminals in Europe or in Germany, or by imports from Norway at some time or until some time also from the Netherlands or from other places having pipelines to Germany, but you have to reduce it. So these are the two components. As I said, the price vector, the gas demand was very successful because of these high prices. Of course, that had quite some impact also on industry and also on final households. Therefore, there were massive relief packages implemented by the German government over the course of last year. But it was very effective in reducing demand, which was the important part of this. Okay, as said, also the infrastructure plays a role, and I already talked about this. Of course, many countries, they have already historically LNG terminals, or they were building LNG terminals, and I already talked about this. Many of them have not been used intensively in the past, but the point is that this is a security against unforeseeable events. And now we have as well started with new terminals in Germany, actually here in Greifswald, Lubmin, with very high capacities. Now, if you look back to the last year, you can see that the German LNG terminal have not contributed a lot so far. Actually, they've not been used a lot, with the exception Wilhelmshaven. But as I said, I mean, the idea is not that they are used all the time, no, but that they are there if other things happen. If you think about, for example, the Norwegian pipelines to Germany and other infrastructure things, no, it's there as in unforeseeable events. No, so they are currently built up, and that is something that also is part of the Zeitenwende. So, to sum up now, how can you achieve this? And I already mentioned some of these components. You need the right regulatory framework to cope with these dilemmata, social dilemmata. You have to think about how to deal with emissions in existing assets. In Germany, that is, for example, coal generation. We have a lot of coal generation, but also steel and other things. To do that, actually, we will see that, for example, pricing carbon, which is one of the possibilities to cope with the externality of climate mitigation. I don't care if I'm posting costs on others by burning fossil fuels, because these costs are not priced properly. This can be avoided by putting a price on fossils. Okay, then I have the social costs implemented in private decisions. And that helps us to move out of existing assets, to change ways of using fossils today. And that's very powerful. Electrification is part of the story. But if you want to electrify, then, I mean, you need cheap electricity. So you have to build out renewables fast. And you have to cope with problems of sector coupling. So you have to bring the electricity to the other sectors, as I've described it, in buildings and in mobility and in industry. Which also means you need the right, electricity market design. That's an ongoing discussion in Germany, how the electricity market has to be built or rebuilt to cope with high shares of renewables. It's a different market than a market that only has low shares of renewables, and I will show you in a second why. But that is not enough. You also need all these other possibilities in sectors that are difficult to electrify, and this is hydrogen and syn fuels that you have to upscale. The problem here is that these technologies are relatively infant at the moment. So they are, I mean, we know them, but they are here only as prototypes in the demonstration phase or in very early market entry. So this market has to scale up from scratch. So if you look at the European hydrogen targets, then we talk about factors of 100 or 1,000 or whatever, because it's practically nothing is there, and we have very high ambitions. So renewables is also difficult, but in Germany we talk more about a factor of 3 or 4, not about a factor of 100 or 1,000. Okay, and lastly, you need the infrastructure. And I talked about the fossil infrastructure that has to be later on turned into an infrastructure for green hydrogen or green ammonia or whatever. But there's also, of course, infrastructure that has to be built out for electricity, also for transporting CO2, because you have to take CO2 out of processes. And last but not least, we talked about this during the lunch. There's a lot of red tape and bureaucracy, which makes it very difficult and time-consuming to change many of these things. And of course, this has to as well to be changed. Now, the building block of all this is renewable energy. And if you look at the targets of the German government, of the new German government, now already in place for more than 2 years, they have increased substantially their build-out targets for renewables. So this is what we have currently. wind onshore, wind offshore, photovoltaic, total capacity of 133 gigawatt. Now, next 8 years, we want to triple photovoltaic build out from 70 to 215 gigawatt. And then in 10 years to 400 gigawatt. Wind offshore from 8 to 30 to 70. Wind onshore from 60 to 120, including some windmills that leave the market because they reach the end of their technical lifetimes. So we have to build more than double, to 160 in 2040. So this is super ambitious, super ambitious. But you can see that I show you here that our installation rates on a monthly basis for the last year. And this is here what would be necessary to achieve these numbers in 2030. And you can see that, well, for the PV, we are not lagging so much behind, so that's quite dynamic actually already. For wind, it's a different story. For wind, it's, let's say, factor 4 or so. For PV, we need to double, 50% more. Why is that the case? Well, we have, as I said, very long and difficult approving procedures. There are too little areas designated in planning processes for wind as well for PV. There are a lot of lawsuits due to nature conservation and species protection, and there is sometimes lack of public acceptance of the project, which of course lead to more lawsuits and so forth. So these things are really barriers to build out. The government has addressed all this, so there have been initiatives to address all these points. But we will see whether this is really going to change speed dramatically. It's still open. The interesting thing is economic competitiveness, something that we talked about over the last 2 decades, is probably no longer the biggest problem in renewable build-out. Because with the high electricity prices that we are seeing currently on the markets, it is in many cases relatively profitable to invest in renewables. And therefore, a lot of the investment, most of the investment goes in renewables. So this is no longer, I would say, the bottleneck. The bottleneck is actually in these parts. Okay? And if you would open up and provide, let's say, more reliance and more security to investors, and remove some of these things here, you would see and provide more space and so forth, you would see, I think, as well, a speed up of these numbers. So that is, of course, the focus. But then you have to as well think how you organize the markets, because if you think about what happens if you are building up these renewables, the whole market is going to change substantially. And I show you this here in this graph. That's just a random week I took in April. And this is here the German electricity market. This is demand. The purple line here, demand. Okay. And this is supply. And you can see, every day, sun in Germany goes up and down, up and down. And then you see there's wind, more, less wind. There's offshore wind. There's biomass running all the time, but little, okay? And then you see that at in some hours we have to import electricity, and in some hours we are going to export electricity to the European market because Germany is, of course, integrated fully into the European grid. Now, how is the same week, same weather patterns, how would that week look like in 2030? Now we are in the situation 80% renewables. That's what I showed you. Okay. Okay. Now what happens if the sun goes up? Then we have 215 gigawatt of solar providing electricity. And we have these 120 gigawatt of wind now that is generating electricity. Okay. Which means that if you think about the the German demand, German peak demand for electricity is somewhere here, 80 gigawatt, 85 gigawatt. It's going to increase a bit, no, but we have overbuilt the demand substantially. Okay, so you can see in just a random week, we would have twice as much electricity as is needed in the old demand pattern, which means that we have to think about how we can flexibilize demand, which means not these old demand patterns, but new demand patterns like this one, which means demand is following supply, and we find ways to flexibilize demand, which then also include electric mobility and battery cars, heat pumps, industrial processes, and so forth. Consumers that are pooled via aggregators that use cheap electricity when it's there in large amounts. Okay, and flexibilize this in hours and reduce demand in hours where there is not much renewable there. Okay, so you're charging your batteries, you're running your electrolyzer to produce hydrogen in these hours, and then you are decharging your batteries or running your power plants on hydrogen in hours where there is very little renewable available. Okay, and so this is a huge challenge also for the markets, because you can see this is totally different in only 8 years. And you need a market design that allows you to flexibilize this, and that means you need variable prices on these markets, variable prices that indicate the value of electricity in a specific hour and also in a specific region in Germany. And that's tricky because most of these renewables are going to be built in the north, and electricity will be used in the south. And we have a big transportation problem in Germany. So it's not only that we have to get price signals on a very fine disaggregation time-wise, but also locational signals. Okay. So this is what we have to do for electrification. And as I said, a large part then will be, in the long run, electrified, including the transport sector and buildings. A large part will be electrified. But there will be also a large demand for hydrogen and synthetic fuels in industry, in aviation, in shipping, and so forth. Okay, so we need the infrastructure for this. And then there is a large uncertainty in between, where it's not really clear whether this will be electrified or that will be using hydrogen and synthetic fuels. And that, for example, relates to heavy transport. So in the past, we thought heavy transport will be based here on fuel cell and hydrogen. Now people think it will be electrified in the long run, but still open to discussion. Okay, the same for high temperature heat. Can that be electrified? Most people think it cannot be electrified. That was not me. Okay, we started. Okay, but I can talk, no? I can continue. So you can restart, and if the presentation is still on, I can continue, no? Okay, so I said electrification of high temperature heat processes. Before we thought this has to be all substituting fossils by hydrogen and synthetic fuels. Now, for example, BASF has built a large cracker, a first cracker that ran on electricity. Okay, so many of these things are still unclear, which means that we have to see how technologies develop, but we also need let's say, infrastructure for both cases. No, it's because it's not really clear where it is developing, so we should actually provide infrastructure for both pathways, because infrastructure is expensive, but compared to a failure in not having the infrastructure to provide the right energy source would be even more dramatic. Okay, and my point is here simply that there are a lot of energy transition technologies that are still in relatively early stages, and where we still do not exactly know how they will play out in the long run. And we have to keep this uncertainty in mind. Okay, so we don't. There are many pathways. Okay, when we wrote the IPCC chapter on energy systems last year, now we described different pathways. Okay, so there are different pathways to move to net zero, and it's we have an idea how this might look like, but there's still uncertainties, and we have to cope with these uncertainties, because these projects are sometimes in very early phases, and that means we are not sure whether they are really materializing, how fast costs are going down in these different applications. Now think about hydrogen. This is something, I have no slide on that, but I can explain. Think about hydrogen. I said we have to scale up hydrogen dramatically in order to bring down costs. So this is simple learning by doing efforts. So we are scaling up to reduce costs in large projects. But at the moment, we do not see a lot of these projects on the ground. If you look at the last hydrogen review of the International Energy Agency, you see there are a lot of claims to build out fast, but you see very little happening in reality in terms of larger projects. Okay, so the question is that really going to materialize? And if not, how can we be still, again, resilient to other developments? Which means in the hydrogen case, for example, we have to think about how we build up a hydrogen strategy, import strategy, that is coping with these type of uncertainties, with many suppliers that bring hydrogen to us, probably also with different carriers. So we might start with green or not green ammonia in the beginning, because this is something that we can get. We might cope with higher costs at the beginning because some of these countries, they still have to invest a lot in infrastructure, making it more costly for them to provide this. But in the long run, they might still be important, because with hydrogen we have a relatively large number of exporters where we can draw hydrogen from South America, from Africa, from Asia, from Australia, from Canada, because we are spreading. We are looking now for large providers of cheap electricity from renewables, and there are a lot of these options. But as I said, this has still to be developed. It's not there yet. Okay. And the last point I want to make is infrastructure. Because that's important, and this is just a recent picture. I said we need infrastructure, electricity infrastructure, and hydrogen infrastructure. And the point on electricity infrastructure is that most of, as I already said, so we are transporting electricity over longer distances, because supply and demand are also locationally different. They're moving apart, also with the nuclear phase-out. A lot of nuclear plants were in the south. A lot of the dispatchable power plants, coal power plants and so forth, were at the demand centers. We are closing them down, which means that we have to transport more renewable electricity over longer periods, over longer distances, which means we need a lot of new grid to be developed over the next years, which means in the newest Netzentwicklungsplan, just published in the second version in mid of this year, they estimate 20,000 kilometers new high voltage lines in Germany. Okay, so that's dramatic, and that has to be there relatively quickly because you need it already soon in order to cope with energy demand in the south, for example. And the other part is hydrogen. Here I show you a picture of the Wasserstoff-Kernnetz, so the core grid for hydrogen. This was just published for the first time just in July 2023. Which means this is all very new, and we will have to see how it develops. You can see that, well, there will be a core grid that is delivering hydrogen in Germany over the next, to be developed over the next 10 years. Totally unclear how this is then spreading to smaller areas, to the industry, besides the main centers. So there is also here a lot to be done. No? And I can, what you can see here is all the red ones. These are areas where there is a large hydrogen demand, for example, from industry. And the green ones where they might inject hydrogen into the system, including, of course, then the LNG terminals that are hydrogen ready. They are going to be changed in a way that they as well are potentially taking up hydrogen for the future. So a large challenge. The last challenge I would like to tackle after I talked about the climate challenge and the security challenge, I want to say a word about prices. Because that is, of course, very relevant for households and industry. I show you here just the development on the electricity side, but probably I can also say a few sentences on, on gas. Gas prices have gone down in Germany, again after last year's hikes, but gas prices in Germany, they were very, very low. Okay, we talk about 15 to 20 euro per megawatt hour gas. Now they are probably double the level of this today, but of course a year ago they have been much, much higher. Okay, so gas prices have gone down, but they are still much higher than before. The problem is, or the problem from the environmental point of view is that gas prices are going to be going down also in the future because we have a lot of new developments on the gas markets with new extractions, not only in Qatar, which go online in 2026, but also in the Gulf region. So we have new projects bringing gas to the global market. We have reduced demand of gas, like in Germany, which means more supply, less demand, prices will go down further. And then the question, of course, is are, let's say, carbon prices, for example, being able to make gas expensive again, or are gas prices going to go down also in the future, which would be a problem for environmental reasons. Now, here I show you the electricity prices. Now the same pattern. Now we have this peak of electricity prices that was driven by high gas prices, because gas very often being the a pivotal technology, the marginal technology setting prices in the German market. Now the gas prices have gone down again, but the level of the prices is around 100 euro per megawatt hour. Now gas prices before were probably half of that, probably even less. Okay, and that will be a problem. And you can see that expectation on the markets, they are that prices are going to stay high, and also modeling results looking at the long-term perspective of the prices indicate that prices will be around 80 to 90 euro per megawatt hour, which means that is double the electricity prices we had before. And if you look at large German consumers, like steel plants, for example, chemical industry. They were actually paying for electricity around 45 to 50 euro per megawatt hour. So that means they are going to face a large problem in terms of international competition, because their electricity prices are simply going to be much, much higher. Electricity costs are going to be much, much higher, and they have less opportunities to pass on costs to their customers. So that's an issue. Let's say the smaller German companies, the Mittelstand, the small, medium-sized enterprises, they will be able to cope with this levels of prices, because a lot can be actually pushed forward to customers, and electricity prices for the small, medium-sized enterprises, they have been high already in the past. Okay, so this is feasible, but for the big consumers, that have been subsidized also in the past by alleviating them from paying feed-in tariffs, electricity, taxes, grid charges, and so forth. For them, this will be really a substantial, probably existential threat, these high electricity prices. And as I said, we do not really see that this is going to change in the foreseeable future. So you can see that there are many, many challenges ahead, actually more challenges than we might be able to cope with. But I think the Zeitenwende in this respect was as well helpful to some extent, on the one hand, to also show that past efforts to build out renewables, to invest in energy efficiency, were actually helpful. They were done too little and too late, but this was actually the right direction. It would have been good if we would have been in a better situation to start with. I showed you the first picture, but it is as it is, and we have to, let's say, reshuffle and restructure our energy system now under different circumstances, because as you of course know, there are much more tensions in public budgets now on the European scale, also in Germany, with many different things that are demanding a lot of money, and these transitional expenses are more and more difficult to cope with. And that's the reason why now we have to think about how we put the framework conditions right, because it will be not possible for the state to do all that, to build all that, because the financial means will be just too much. But I think we've seen that there is not really an alternative, and we have to move quickly. Okay, thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you very much for your descriptive and meaningful lecture, Professor Löschel. And now, if you have any questions or comments on the lecture, please. It's a possibility to ask questions, but I will ask you to use microphone because of Zoom listeners.
Thanks for the presentation. It was very interesting to see some consequences between the facts you mentioned and also some experiences here we have in our country. And what I wanted to ask, maybe for some more detailed information if possible, I think you mentioned somewhere in the first part of presentation that there were also attempts to introduce heat pumps in Germany, and they were not successful. Do you have some data? What was the reason? Why so? Because it's quite a topical issue here in our country, and we are maybe looking forward of still having them. So it would be good to have some comments. Thanks.
No, I think we also we will also have a lot of heat pumps. No, the issue was that the idea was to implement a law that has foreseen a very strict regulation which says 65% of your energy for heating should come from renewable sources, which means that basically you need to use heat pumps, more or less, okay, in many circumstances. And the problem was that, let's say, this, I think this whole process was not very well prepared. So most people were just confronted with the 65% rule, but we have not elaborated properly. For example, the possibilities of implementing that in the local circumstances. So these things are very local, and what we should have done, and actually this was something that we asked the government to do already a decade ago, was to work on these community heating plants, where you go from community to community, you look at what is the industrial demand for heat, what is the commercial demand by private and households for heat, and what are the possibilities to supply that, decentrally and centrally, to come up with a coherent story. And that has not been done. So people were just confronted with this, and I mean the media was going crazy about that. They claimed that you have now to tear out your gas boiler or your oil boiler, and all have to go electric, and nobody knew what that actually means and how you can do it, because German buildings are relatively bad insulated. We asked for that also for a long time. So the situation is not that you can change that just right away, and that was the issue. It was mainly with existing buildings, because new buildings in Germany, they do heat pumps already, because that is the most efficient one. But as I said, it's a problem of planning, a problem of information, and a problem of the economics of it. Because I showed you electricity price is very high. Historically, gas prices very low. Many people were betting on low gas prices, so we tried to explain to them that in the future we have the emissions trading system for the building sector that will be reflected in high CO2 prices for buildings. So you should be aware that the time of cheap gas is potentially over, because we have this new regulation. But this is something that is that's very far away, and so people were on many areas, they were not, they were resisting this. And the problem is that, of course, a lot of trust in this technology was actually destroyed in this public debate. So some people think heat pump is really a bad thing, but it's a good thing. But we have not, let's say, paved well the way towards these changes, and that's the problem. So now what they've done, they've more or less stopped the process. They have now asked all communities to come up with community heating plans by 2026 to 2028. So they have to do all this planning, okay? And until that, and then they are going to design areas where you are getting centralized heat, where you get probably gas, which is potentially hydrogen in the future or whatever, or methanol, green methanol or whatever. But this is going to happen now only in 2028, let's say. And until that, you are free to do whatever you want. Okay, so this is now what I just said. I think it was politically a big failure in this way, and you have to do it better, hopefully. Not saying that this is not the right way. I think it's the right way, because that's what I showed. If you want to reduce emissions, you have to care about the installations, but you have to as well have to think about how to use decentralized or centralized green heat in larger contents.
If there are any questions in Zoom, you have a possibility to write the questions in chat. And are there any more questions from participants? Yes, please.
Thank you, Professor, for your very insightful presentation. I have a question about LNGs. In Latvia, we've had a heated debate about it for many years already. Should we have one LNG terminal in Latvia or not? Right after the war, political decision was made that we will build one. Then again, now it seems that we won't. And but in Germany, it happened very quickly. So many LNG terminals were built during 1 year. So how do you see the future of them? You said it's kind of for security reasons. You may not even use them, but for the security reasons, they are there. But don't you think that for the companies, businesses, it may be a very powerful trigger to push for using them? Because especially if you say that the gas may be very cheap in the future, then it's a very easy way how to get cheap energy again.
Yeah. No, that's an important point because, of course, using LNG terminals is still relatively cheap, no? So if you think about gas prices, that's an adder of probably 25% or so. So if you are really accessing very cheap international gas, then it's going to be very cheap also when you use the LNG terminals. So the point there is that you really have to make sure, this is my CO2 pricing slide, no? You really have to make sure that gas is not going to become cheap again. So when we talked about these measures, the last year's measures about the Russian cutting of our gas supply here, we actually proposed to set up an import tax on gas. Okay, and the import tax on gas, I mean, that's a classical resource economics tool to get the revenues from gas exporters redirected to you, no? Because now the revenues are not given to Russia, no, but they are staying inside. You're taxing this, okay? And the other point is you could make sure that you signal gas is never going to be cheap, no? Because you set an import tax that makes sure gas is, I don't know, always 75 euro, no? Or always 100 euro. So if you make an investment decision about your heat pump or whatever, it's clear, no, this is not a good idea, no, so to say. No? Plus, it's shifting revenues to your state, no? I think when we proposed that in 2022, people thought we are crazy because we said, you know, we have to stabilize the high prices because that's the best way to move ahead, also in terms of energy security reasons, but we were not able to implement that, basically. No? But you're right, no? If we don't prevent gas prices to fall, then we will have a switchback in many of these applications, and therefore the heating law discussion was not a good one, because, as I said, they have now given discretion to people to decide again on their heating systems, and if the market signals are not directing into the right direction, then this could be bad. No? But in principle, I would say, well, it's good to have the opportunity. Many of these projects might not survive because they are not governmentally funded in a way, but they are market-based commodity or investments, trader investments that might simply not be competitive in the long run. Of course, we see already, that's what I said, only about 10% of our LNG imports came through the new terminals, the German terminals. No? So they were not really heavily used. It was mainly coming through other parts. But the reason is that all Europe has reduced gas consumption, and the LNG terminals were already not fully used up, so there are still potentials, and we use still these potentials. I think still it's good to have these investments. The question is, of course, the size. No? And there I think you can debate what is appropriate size. No? Probably an indication can be the worst shock now that you can expect, which would be your cut off from Norwegian gas supplies. And then you have to probably think what this might mean, given also that we have full storage, blah, blah, blah. And then you might come at a size that is potentially not that big as we have it today, because, as I said, there are a lot of commercial projects, but it's also not zero, I think, for Germany at least. Now I cannot talk for Latvia, but for Germany it's not zero, I think.
Are there any other questions or comments now? Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I guess that's how everybody starts. So I have a question maybe about the public itself. We kind of touched upon this already in your presentation, answering also the questions. Yeah. So seeing general public having a bit more into deny of the climate change itself, once we look at it, and also with the whole Russian invasion, it also meant that basically energy prices went up. So looking at the 2030 target, which is, if we look globally, it's right around the corner right now. What's the general opinion in German public about all of these changes and potential even more increase in like general energy itself, and as well from the like government perspective? Is there any educational programs whatsoever to basically keep public up to date, and basically how it's executed as well?
Yeah, I mean, probably this is a question for the experts coming later, but I mean, I give it a first shot. I mean, I think one of the problems indeed was that in the German elections, and also in the, let's say, governmental operations over the last decade, the idea was given that, you know, climate change is actually costless. It doesn't cost anything, no? That is how the Greens actually started their campaigns. That is how the Christian Democrats, Social Democrats run the last decade of governments, no, where they actually did, I would say, a lot of symbolic policy without doing really the heavy lifting, let's say. No? So the idea that they were giving is climate policy is actually costless, does not, you know, require any type of adjustments and whatsoever. Now, this is not the case. Okay, as I said, it's a good thing to do because it pays out in the long run and globally. Okay, but individually for the country, it's an investment that has to be lifted. No? So therefore, it's very difficult to change this the storyline, no? But you have to do that. No? You have to tell people that in fact, no, this is all necessary, and we have to do it. No? And there is a long-term gain, no, that is associated with this, and we cannot just stick to the status quo, because there's of course a lot of tendency to stick to the status quo. No? And that was very imminent when we were heavily attacked by industrialists. No? I mean BASF and whatever. No, they said, no, we have to do what we have done always. No, which means that we have to make sure we continue import Russian gas. No, and the interesting thing was Russia cut off gas. It's not Germany cutting off gas. No, it was Russia. Okay, so then we have to cope with it anyways. No, but it's very difficult to get out of the status quo. No, and you have to explain to these people and to the broader public that staying in the status quo will be really dangerous. So if we want to stay competitive, for example, in the global market, no, I think we have to do a lot of the things that I've outlined, but much faster. And that means we have to, you know, invest a lot in order to, you know, stay in these markets with, let's say, then affordable energy prices, no, and being competitive, no, on these different areas. But that is, as I said, I mean, you said this, no, I mean, many people are not convinced, I would say, no, and especially, of course, with the high prices that they have faced in the past, no, this is just building upon that.
Also, question. So, because just 1 week ago, and I think this is also valid for this region here, we observed that we had a big flood coming also to the eastern part of Germany, and maybe this might lead to a change, and we can already put a price tag on climate change. And do you think that this might lead to more acceptance in the nearer future? No.
No, I think yes. I mean, I showed you this graph. This here is really dramatic. We have seen a ratcheting of targets over the last years that is dramatic, and the reason is that climate change is no longer, let's say, theoretical construct, but people think that they are experiencing it, like the flooding we had last week in Germany, but as well the droughts we had over summer and so forth. And of course we had a lot of protest movements. Think about Fridays for Future, that were very influential on policy making. So. I mean, we moved from 40% to 55% to 65% in our targets for 2030 to climate neutrality. So this has changed a lot. The problem is, I mean, now we have the right targets, I would say, but we have to implement them. Okay, and that is the other problem. So I think people are more receptive, but the problem is, of course, this is. That is not the whole population. That's part of the population, but you have to take with you, at least 50%, and that's the tricky part of it. And I think at the moment, if we would have elections at the moment, I think many, let's say, protagonists that try to build these changes would probably come out fairly with poor results at the moment. So that's the tricky one. I mean, we've seen that this is very influential. People see that. There might be more acceptance also to some of these things, but it's not in line with the challenge. The challenge is much bigger. So we move a bit towards the right level, but we are not there right now. And that's the problem.
Okay, now I would like to thank you very much for your presentation and openness to questions. Thank you very much. I think we have a possibility to ask questions after the second presentation, also to Professor Löschel, but now I would like to continue our scientific evening with the presentations by Judith Kärn and Vineta Kleinberga. And I would like to introduce you very shortly to them. So Judith Kärn is a PhD student at the University of Greifswald, and her research interests lie in particular in the interface between social sciences and law. Further research focuses on the investigation of legal and social discourses in the context of offshore wind farms and hydrogen technologies. Vineta Kleinberga is a researcher and a PhD student at the Faculty of European Studies of Rīga Stradiņš University, and her research focuses on the dynamics between policy formation, strategic communication, and societal perception. She has conducted research on climate change narratives on political and also other topics. And currently, Vineta Kleinberga and Judith Kärn are implementing the project The Energy Trilemma in the Baltic Sea region, a methodology for an index assessing the discursive environment of energy, security, energy equity, and environmental sustainability that is supported by the Baltic-German University Liaison Office, and therefore I'm very pleased that today we are having possibility to hear more about the project results. Yes, please.
Good evening, dear participants, the participants on the Zoom. So we are going to present part of our findings in this research, and we will talk about the energy trilemma and the public discourse of Latvia and Germany today towards a methodology for a comparative index. I should say about ourselves that we both do discourse analysis, but Judith, she's doing a discourse analysis from a quantitative perspective. I do a discourse analysis from a qualitative perspective. In a way, we make a perfect synergy because usually the discourse is analyzed either in a quantitative way or in a qualitative way. In this research, we try to combine both perspectives. And thank you, the Baltic-German University Liaison Office, for supporting us. The support really helped us to bring the research forward. We had a good co-working experience at both universities, which actually helped us to develop the index. So what we are going to talk about. So first we will provide a definition of what the energy trilemma is, then very shortly about the state of the art of the current research on the energy trilemma. Then we will give a short justification for why do we actually need an energy trilemma discourse index, then a few words about our research design, and then our findings. So we actually elaborated the first prototype of our energy trilemma discourse index. And in the end, we will talk briefly about the limitations and problems which should be solved, and some words about the future research. So what is the energy trilemma? Actually, it's the thing the Professor Löschel was talking about. So it's three things which you have to take into account when you think about the energy policy. First is energy security, another one is environmental sustainability, and the third one is energy affordability, but we want to look at it a bit broader, talking about energy justice. So energy security, it's been the most developed concept of all, and here we just provide the definition of the International Energy Agency. Basically, it's the uninterrupted availability of the energy sources. That's energy security. Energy justice, we use the definitions which are elaborated actually in academia, not so visible currently in the real life, but in a way, energy justice, it's a process which represents reliable, fair, and affordable energy for current and future generations, which are distributed in an equal way and which distributes equally benefits and burdens of energy use. For the environmental sustainability, we use the definition of the World Energy Council. So it's a transition of a country's energy system towards mitigating and avoiding potential environmental harm and climate change impacts in the long term. So state of the art, energy trilemma, it's not a new concept. It's been described and investigated by many scholars, but what we found out that there are also actually quite many indices available nowadays for the energy trilemma. You can look for the indices who look at the energy trilemma as a whole, or you can find the indices which measure particular aspects of energy trilemma, for example, energy security. But what we find out is that actually there is not even a scientific consensus on how to measure the energy trilemma, as well as different dimensions of it. And we couldn't find any indices which would focus on discourses. That's why we decided that we could try to develop a quantitative energy trilemma discourse index. Why is it important? Why do we need such an index? As Professor was also mentioning, and what we saw from our debate after the presentation was that public mood is important as well. Public perceptions are important, and it can either activate or deactivate certain policies and policy implementations. So it's actually important how we talk about energy transition, what aspects we emphasize, what people find as acceptable to them or not. So that's why we thought that we could try to see how the energy trilemma is communicated to the people and to quantify it, to see which parts are paid more attention to. Is it energy security? Is it sustainability? Is it energy justice? And we also wanted to see how they are framed, because we can talk about energy security, but each of us can understand a different thing about it. So we found it also in the literature that a comparative discursive research is still missing, and there are no tools actually for quantitative measurement of the discursive side of the energy trilemma. In our project, our primary purpose is to present a methodology for an open access index that would enable a quick comparison of countries' discursive positions. We are focusing on the Baltic Sea region, but in the future it can, of course, be applied to other regions. And by comparing the discourses with a very simple index, like for policymakers, for example, could see very quickly where is the possibility to cooperate with other countries. And yes, and the index, it's important to compare the discourses also because it does not only address the decision outcomes, but it can also show the motivations, justifications, perceptions, contestations, and contexts which underline the choices that particular countries make. Now I give the microphone to my colleague and she continues with the research design.
Okay, so hopefully my microphone is already working. So I will give you a short overview of our research design. So what did we do? At first, we tried to identify possible discursive keywords based on the literature review, also based on comparing different economic indices that are already at place. And we did some qualitative as well as conceptual literature reviews. So then we did our first quantitative analysis of keywords showing up in pilot documents. So for now, we just use 2 documents, which are the National Energy and Climate Plans of Latvia and Germany. But those date back to 2020. So our results refer to what was written there in 2020. And this is why we think our research is also very important and interesting, because within this year still there will be, these documents will be updated. And the discourses, so governmental discourses, might have changed over time due to the Russian aggression. So we also did a qualitative analysis of how our keywords and key concepts are being framed. And in the end, we achieved to develop our first prototype of a quantitative discourse analytic tool. And so the idea was also, and still is, to have a inductive research circle. So we will develop our prototype, then we will apply it to reality, see how, if it still works, or if things are being framed differently, like for example in other contexts. So far we only studied Germany and Latvia. We are limited to time, and this is also why we would like to repeat our research with the new documents. So this slide will give you a first overview over some keywords that we used for developing the index. So for example, for energy security, we used supply, of course, security, and which also, at least for the Latvian case back then, was quite an issue, Russia, for example. And we are very much looking forward to what is being written in the new documents that will be disposed to the public at the end of the year. So for energy justice, we try to mix several aspects which are being discussed in academia. So, like for example, there you have aspects like, is the public being represented in what is happening within these energy transitional things? But it is also about, like, for example, affordability, fairness, equalities, and these kind of words. Also with regards to environmental sustainability, just some other aspects, or there we had, for example, of course, the CO2 emissions and these kind of things. And what we also found is that sometimes these terms are already used quite differently. For example, the German document talks about renewables, whilst the Latvian discusses RES, which means absolutely the same. So this is also a bit problematic. So we still are facing some challenges, like with regards to words like wind, solar, hydrogen, because these terms can be framed in very different ways. So we will have to do some further investigations where to actually put them into which dimension. And this is also, we show you this because this makes our studies a bit critical, and we will have to go into more detail in our future versions and developments of our prototype. So these are the first results of our index that you can see here. So we can see, what you can see here is how often in total, or whenever some dimension of the energy trilemma is being addressed in the document, then you would see here the share. So what we can see here, I think it's quite obvious, is that in both Latvia as well as Germany, justice is not being addressed that much, even though the EU actually puts a lot of effort into making a just transition happen. Then what came to a surprise to us is that Germany is focusing more on the security dimension than, like, for example, Latvia. And in total, the sustainability dimension is being addressed quite a lot. This doesn't come to, this is not so surprising, as it is an official document which the EU demands the countries to give in order to say and tell the European Union what those countries will do with regards to climate change. But we can also observe that here we have a quite similar looking chart. And it would be also, so in the future, it would be nice to also do this kind of analysis with, like, for example, social media data. So there maybe we could find other distributions which we would be interested in. And this is also some context where our index can be applied to. Yeah. And we also did some robustness checks. So, like I already mentioned, sometimes we cannot be sure where to put these specific terms. Here, for example, we reduced the word climate from the index, but still the picture is pretty much the same, so that's quite all right. But we just wanted to show to you that, whenever you change something within the methodology of your index, this might lead to effects that you can see here. Next slide, please. Yeah. So I already showed to you the distribution of these three dimensions, but it wouldn't be honest to not talk about the total references. So here we can see how often any of these dimensions are being addressed in the text. And also for Germany and Latvia, this is not that much, to be honest. But then again, we shouldn't be over-critical, because this pie slice also contains very unimportant words, like, for example, and these kind of things. So we shouldn't be over-criticizing.
So I will mention probably some qualitative findings about the index. So what we saw, yes, that for example, energy security, it is part of both index, but as I said, energy security can be interpreted quite differently in different contexts, and that is something which you cannot catch by quantitative analysis. You have to go through the text qualitatively. And with energy security, we can see what Professor Löschel was talking about, that in Germany it is very important to have cheap energy for the industry. And that is what was very explicit in the German document, that energy security actually was seen as an economic concept, and it meant reliable supplies for economy, enough resources for German competitiveness. Whereas in Latvian case, in the Latvian document, we could see that energy security is used as a geopolitical concept. And it basically meant independence from Russia. So we should increase our energy security because we have to reduce our dependency of Russia, and we, like in Latvia, we don't talk too much about energy security in terms of energy supplies for our economy. As well with sustainability, we saw that in Germany it was explicitly used as an environmental concept, mentioning and defining that economic development has to be environmentally sound, whereas in Latvia, again, it was used as a self-sufficiency concept. So we say that sustainable energy policy is the one which ensures our economic development being free from imported fossil fuels. So it's a completely different understanding of sustainability. Yeah, as my colleague mentioned, Russia is, of course, more often mentioned in the Latvian document, which is also interesting because Germany, like it was in 2019 when the document was adopted, and what we heard from the presentation before, we knew that Germany actually relies on the Russian gas, but Russia was actually not mentioned at all. About the energy justice, yes, like majority of the keywords were from the academic literature, and we couldn't find them in the documents. Maybe it's because the purpose of the documents was not to talk about energy justice, but anyways, it's part of the energy transition. And what we could see is that the academic dimensions of energy justice were not part of the documents. Then we saw, paid also attention to particular sources of energy. We would expect that Germany would talk a lot about nuclear. Actually not. It was more mentioned as a side issue. It's something where the debate has been finished in Germany already, so it was just mentioned that we are phasing out nuclear energy, and that's it. No plans for nuclear in the German energy policy. In Latvia, it was not an issue at all. And if we talk about renewables, then Germany talks a lot about hydrogen and wind power, which we also saw from the previous presentation. Whereas in Latvia, we put a strong focus on biomass and forests. About limitations and problems.
So I will quickly talk about the limitations that we were facing with our study. So first of all, we only analyzed official state documents. Those might be unreliable sources for intentions and therefore possible future cooperation. because we don't know if they only want to fulfill what the EU is expecting them to do, or if it's real talk, so to say. Or also what our speaker, so what you mentioned before is that we actually don't know if it's only talking about things or if it is also doing things. So it is not so easy to actually find data sources that are addressing all 3 dimensions. So this is why we would look into the future and maybe also try to analyze public debates and social media data. As has already been mentioned, we face framing issues. So some terms like, for example, wind and solar can be framed in many different contexts, and so far we simply didn't integrate them, but it would, some more fine-grained analysis would be necessary to maybe integrate these. And our findings, of course, are limited to these specific documents and might differ in public discourses. What we also would like to ask is maybe if, because due to our findings with regards to the idea of energy justice and how it is being addressed, so we are not sure if this discussion on energy justice maybe is a bit too academic, so we will have to see in how far we can find it in real discussions, also in public discussions, for example. So we would like to finish with our research outlook. We are still on the topic, we're still there. We want to go on with an evolution of future prototypes, taking into account these framing challenges and intensifying also qualitative and quantitative analysis. We will have to conduct some robustness checks. So one plan, for example, is to use the similar amount of words in each dimension. What we are especially looking forward to is to really analyze the discourses after the war has broken out. So we are very much looking forward to the documents coming up at the end of this year. And yeah, so the idea in the end is also to give the public and also public servants some tool at hand in order to identify and quickly compare statements, state positions with regards to these 3 dimensions in order to have maybe some better cooperation possibilities in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your insightful presentation. And now everyone has again a possibility to ask questions or to comment on the presentation. Also, the participants in Zoom can use chat box to write us questions. Please.
Thanks for your presentation. I have a very trivial academic question regarding the future plans. So there was a very challenging and interesting diagram that showed that the situation with energy trilemma between Germany and Latvia doesn't differ much. Well, there were slight differences in sustainability versus the safety, and justice was almost the same. But so anyway, it was very interesting to see. Well. Do you have any intentions to have a deeper look into Baltic area, let's say what's in Lithuania and Estonia? Yeah, it
Definitely.
Is, yeah, so...
This is the idea, because
okay,
we programmed this index, and as we have the index being programmed, we could simply use other documents, other data sources, and simply repeat the studies and look. So the idea would be to do it for the Baltic region at first, and then maybe also do it for the European Union, and also diversify our sources, because here we might assume that, at least back then in 2020, mostly for the other countries, we were assuming that the picture might be the same. It will be interesting to have the picture for Germany after the outbreak of the war, because we're expecting security to rise up a bit here. Yeah, of course. And so this is also the idea to follow track over time. So you can do a comparative analysis with regards to the different countries. You could also have it on a worldwide basis, but you can also follow the development over time.
When it was this situation last year, when the gas prices went up, government introduced various mechanisms to support. So probably this part also should somehow change from year to year. Do you expect so?
Yeah.
Okay, I think maybe we could now finish here with our questions and continue them later. So I would like to thank both speakers. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And thank you all for being here today with us, also in Zoom. And I think it's our responsibility to keep in mind to shift towards sustainable energy in reality, and together we can ensure brighter and cleaner future for all of us. And for those who are participating here in person, I would like to invite you to continue discussions in more informal way in the next room. And for everybody else, I thank you for participation and wish you a nice evening. Thank you very much.